The lights of the Daily Show burned with their usual late-night brilliance, but on this night the glow felt harsher, like a spotlight in an interrogation chamber. Rows of eager faces leaned forward, waiting for laughter to spill across the stage. They had come for comedy, satire, the familiar rhythm of Trevor Noah's wit, but something else hung in the air, something heavier, more combustible. Trevor had just finished a monologue that didn't land like his usual punchlines. This one was sharp, political, tinged with the bitterness of truth. His words, though dressed in comedy, carried the sting of accusation. He spoke of Hollywood privilege, of superheroes who strut across screens while real heroes struggle unseen. He mocked the factory of gods that Marvel Studios had become, a parade of sculpted figures in capes and armor, a distraction, he claimed, from the inequality that chained ordinary people to their daily grind. The crowd chuckled at first, then hesitated. It was the kind of laughter that comes with unease, as if the audience itself wasn't sure whether it was in on the joke or the target of it. The cameras caught Chris Hemsworth's face just then. He was seated across from Trevor, his shoulders broad beneath the studio lights, posture straight, but his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening. For years he had been the embodiment of Thor, the Norse god, a role that demanded charisma, strength, a smile that could light up a billion-dollar franchise. But tonight, there was no thunderous entrance, no scripted lines. There was only the weight of silence. The silence grew. It pressed against the laughter until the sound died completely. A moment stretched, unnatural, like the courtroom pause before a witness delivers a shattering testimony. The audience sensed it. They leaned closer, hungry, nervous, caught in the anticipation of confrontation. Trevor smirked, writing the confidence of his own words. He had landed the strike. His body leaned back, relaxed, as though he had cornered his guest with ease. But Chris Hemsworth's smile faltered, then vanished altogether. His eyes no longer sparkled with the easy charm of a press junket. Instead, they hardened. The weight of Trevor's words was not taken as satire. It was taken as cross-examination. Trevor chuckled, breaking the silence. "Come on, Chris. You know I love Thor. But let's be honest. Doesn't Hollywood build gods while the rest of us live in the dirt?" The crowd laughed nervously again, trying to reclaim the mood. Hemsworth didn't join them. He leaned forward, forearms on his knees, the movement deliberate, predatory, the way a fighter leans before a blow. His baritone voice came low, steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. "I didn't grow up in any Hollywood mansion, Trevor," he said, the faintest edge sharpening each word. "I wasn't born with a hammer in my hand. My dad was a counselor who struggled to keep food on the table. My mom worked endless hours to hold our family together. I was laying floors with my brothers before I ever set foot on a movie set." The audience shifted, startled by the bluntness, the sudden shift from comedy to confrontation. Trevor opened his mouth to respond, but Chris wasn't finished. His voice gathered strength, emotion underlined with steel. "You talk about superheroes distracting people from the real world, but I've met children, kids fighting cancer, who saw those stories and found courage to face another day. Don't tell me that's meaningless. Don't tell me that doesn't matter." The crowd fell silent again. The laughter had died for good. Trevor's smirk flickered, faltering just slightly, just enough for the cameras to catch. And in that moment, the interview was no longer entertainment. It was a courtroom. Trevor Noah stood as prosecutor, armed with wit and systemic critique. But Chris Hemsworth had stepped into the witness stand, not as an actor, but as a man. The trial had begun, live, unedited, impossible to escape. The humiliation was not yet delivered, but the air itself vibrated with its approach. The silence between them became thundercloud, and the audience, wide-eyed and breathless, waited for the lightning. Trevor Noah adjusted himself in the chair, one hand resting casually on the desk, the other raised as if conducting the audience's reaction. The studio lights caught his expression, a smirk, confident, practiced. For years, Trevor had thrived on turning laughter into weaponry, using humor not only to entertain but to expose. Tonight would be no different. He tilted his head toward Hemsworth, voice light at first, almost playful. "Chris, don't get me wrong. I loved Thor. I loved Avengers. Heck, I even wished I had your arms once or twice." The crowd chuckled, the tension easing for a moment. Then Trevor's tone shifted ever so slightly. "But let's be honest. Isn't Hollywood basically a factory of gods? Isn't it a place where the same kind of people, tall, white, sculpted like Greek statues, get to be heroes while the rest of the world just watches? The laughter that followed was nervous again, rippling but unsteady. Trevor leaned in further, eyes narrowing, his words sharpening like a cross-examiner circling a witness. We live in a world where inequality is crushing billions, where kids grow up never seeing someone like them as the savior, the leader, the one holding the hammer. Meanwhile, Hollywood builds this endless mythology of privilege, heroes in capes who all kind of look the same. Don't you think that's a problem? Gasps mixed with laughter. The crowd shifted, some clapping in approval, others glancing toward Hemsworth for his reaction. The stage felt less like a comedy show now, and more like a cultural courtroom. Trevor as the prosecutor laying out Exhibit A, Chris Hemsworth himself, seated beneath the lights, embodiment of everything Trevor described. Trevor's rhythm grew sharper, his timing precise. He pulled out receipts, not literal paper, but facts, statistics that carried the weight of testimony. He spoke of reports on Hollywood casting, studies showing racial disparities, pay gaps that widened between actors of color and their white counterparts. You know, Chris, he said, voice dropping lower, the industry makes billions selling the idea of heroes. But ask yourself, who gets to wear the cape? Who gets to be the savior on that poster? Because more often than not, it's not someone who looks like me, or the majority of people sitting out there. He gestured to the audience, his hand sweeping like a lawyer appealing to the jury. Applause broke out, stronger this time, fueled by conviction rather than comedy. Trevor nodded at the crowd, feeding off the energy, pressing harder. It's not about you as a person. You worked hard, sure, but the system? The system is stacked. It tells the world that power looks like you, that strength looks like you, that leadership looks like you. And meanwhile, millions never even get the chance. The audience erupted, clapping, cheering, some rising slightly in their seats. Trevor smiled, not broadly, but with the satisfaction of a prosecutor who knows he has landed a decisive point. He leaned back, casual once again, as if to say, case closed. Across from him, Hemsworth remained still, his expression unreadable. The camera lingered on him, catching the flicker of tightened lips, the faint narrowing of his gaze. The silence was heavy again, heavy not with uncertainty now, but with anticipation. Trevor's words had landed like blows in a courtroom opening statement, framing the case, painting Hemsworth as not just an actor, but as Exhibit A in a system of exclusion and privilege. The audience roared their approval, like a jury nodding along with the prosecution. For a moment it seemed Trevor had full control. His voice, his wit, his statistics, his laughter, they were the hammer striking the gavel. He had built his argument brick by brick until Hemsworth's presence on that stage felt less like an interview and more like a man standing trial before a jury of millions. But trials are never decided in opening statements. And the witness across from him, broad-shouldered, silent, eyes steady, was not yet broken. The silence deepened, cinematic, electric. Trevor basked in applause, but the camera lingered on Chris Hemsworth. The storm had not passed. It was gathering. Chris Hemsworth sat in silence for a long moment after Trevor's applause line faded. The audience had clapped, some even cheered, but the noise died quickly as the cameras turned back to him. His jaw flexed slightly, the muscle tightening like a coiled spring. The easy grin, the promotional charm that late-night audiences expected from him, was gone. In its place was something heavier, calm, but edged with steel. When he finally spoke, his voice carried low, steady, each syllable deliberate. "Trevor," he said, leaning forward just slightly, "I think you've painted a picture that doesn't quite fit the truth." The audience hushed. The tone was not defensive but precise, like the first words of a witness determined to correct the record. Chris's eyes did not waver from Trevor's. "I didn't grow up in privilege. My family wasn't part of Hollywood or wealth or influence. My dad worked in social services, helping people who had nothing. My mom was a school teacher, stretching every dollar, every meal to keep us afloat. I was a kid in Melbourne laying floors with my brothers to help out before I ever auditioned for anything. That's the truth." His words fell like stones in still water, each rippling across the silent room. Trevor shifted in his seat, still smiling, but the boss had dodged. Audience sensed the balance shifting. Chris wasn't angry. He was resolute. You talk about superheroes as if they're some kind of scam, Chris continued, his hands now open, gesturing softly, the way someone does when speaking from memory rather than strategy. But I've stood with kids in hospital wards, children fighting cancer, who clung to those stories. I've held their hands while they told me they felt braver because of what they saw on screen. Do you want to tell them it's all meaningless? That it's just a distraction? A murmur swept through the crowd. The energy had shifted. No longer did Trevor hold the laughter of the room. Hemsworth had taken the jury's attention, and he wasn't letting go. His voice grew firmer. Yes, the industry has its flaws. Yes, we can do better with representation, with opportunity, but dismissing the value of what these films give people, the hope, the courage, the sense of escape when life feels unbearable, that's not fair, that's not honest. Trevor sat up straighter, no longer leaning back in relaxed dominance. His fingers drummed against the desk. He looked ready to respond, but the cameras stayed fixed on Chris, who was still pressing forward. Privilege? I worked my way here. I know I'm lucky. I know I've had opportunities others didn't. But don't erase the struggle that came before. Don't tell me it doesn't count just because of how I look or the role I play on screen. His tone hardened, though still calm. That's a stereotype too, Trevor. And I thought you'd be the last person to lean on stereotypes. The studio was silent. Not the laughter of satire, not the applause of statistics. Just silence, charged, electric. Chris leaned back finally, his voice softening. I'm proud of what I do, not because it makes me rich, not because it makes me famous, but because I know there are people out there who feel stronger, braver, even for a moment because of it. That's worth something. Don't take that away from them. The audience erupted, not with laughter but with applause, loud and sustained, some even rising to their feet. It wasn't the playful energy of comedy anymore. It was the kind of applause reserved for truth told plainly, without flourish. Trevor forced a smile, raising his eyebrows as if to say, fair enough. But his eyes betrayed a flicker of irritation. For the first time that night, the stage felt less like his court. Hemsworth had spoken with the weight of testimony, and the jury, the audience, had listened. The humiliation wasn't complete, but the balance of power had shifted. The witness had become the advocate, and Trevor Noah was no longer in unquestioned control. The storm was building. The applause thundered through the studio after Hemsworth's retort. Some in the audience even rose to their feet, clapping with the fervor of conviction. Trevor Noah smiled tightly, his hand tapping the desk, waiting for the noise to subside. His eyes, however, betrayed something sharper than amusement, an instinct honed from years of debating politics, race, and culture on live television. He would not let the moment slip. When the room finally quieted, Trevor leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg casually over the other, as if to reclaim his composure. His voice came smooth, but his words cut like a scalpel. Chris, I respect your story. I truly do. But isn't that the narrative every successful person tells? That they came from struggle, that they worked hard, that they earned it? You're not wrong, but you're also the exception. The truth is, most people who look like me don't even get to step through the door to begin with. A murmur swept the crowd. Trevor's tone had shifted again, from comedian to cultural prosecutor. He gestured with his hand, slicing the air. You say you laid floors with your brothers before Hollywood found you, but think about the kid in Johannesburg, or the girl in Mumbai, or the boy in the south side of Chicago. They can work harder than anyone else in the room, but the industry doesn't even see them. The gatekeepers are still the same. The doors are still locked. Applause broke out again, loud, insistent. Trevor nodded, his voice rising. Hollywood likes to tell itself it's changing, but look at the numbers. In 2022, a UCLA diversity report showed that while audiences of color make up the majority of ticket buyers, the majority of lead roles still go to white men. Pay gaps? They're even wider. And when diversity does show up, it's too often tokenism, supporting roles, sidekicks, stereotypes. The audience clapped louder, as though the statistics themselves were evidence in a trial. Trevor pressed on, leaning toward the crowd like an attorney making his case to a jury. Chris, nobody is saying you didn't work for your success. But the system you're part of, let's be honest, it favors people who look like you. Tall, white, blue-eyed. The gods of the screen, while everyone else gets scraps. He let the words hang, heavy, deliberate. Chris sat motionless, his expression calm but unreadable. The camera caught the faint tightening of his lips, the kind of restraint that carried both irritation and focus. Trevor spread his arms toward the crowd. Representation matters. When I grew up in South Africa under apartheid, I didn't see people who looked like me playing heroes. I saw them playing criminals, servants, the background. And when the biggest film franchise in the world keeps putting the same image of power on screen, it tells billions of people worldwide, this is what strength looks like. This is what leadership looks like. And it's not you. The words landed like a gavel strike. The audience erupted, clapping and cheering, Trevor's momentum restored. He turned back to Hemsworth, his smile returning, though sharper now, tinged with challenge. You're talented, Chris. You're hard-working. Nobody denies that. But you're also a beneficiary of a machine that wasn't designed to uplift everyone equally. You didn't create it, but you benefit from it. And if we're being honest, doesn't that come with responsibility? The studio was alive with applause, echoing like the roar of a courtroom gallery stirred by a prosecutor's final flourish. Trevor leaned back again, confident, letting the sound wash over him. He had taken Hemsworth's heartfelt defense and reframed it, shifted it, cast it as anecdote against systemic fact. For a moment, the balance felt restored. The jury, the audience, was once again leaning Trevor's way. But across from him, Chris Hemsworth's stillness was unnerving. He hadn't interrupted, hadn't flinched, hadn't tried to deflect. He sat like a witness gathering strength, waiting for his turn, his eyes fixed on Trevor with calm intensity. The duel was far from over. The storm was not dispersing. It was tightening, ready to strike again. The cheers still echoed in the studio, the audience clapping at Trevor Noah's sweeping indictment of Hollywood's inequality. Trevor basked in it, his posture relaxed, his grin confident. For a moment, it seemed the case was sealed, the prosecution victorious. But then Chris Hemsworth shifted in his seat, not dramatically, not with anger, but with a deliberate calm that drew the audience's attention back to him. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, his gaze steady, his tone measured. Trevor, he began quietly, you talk about privilege, about who benefits from these systems, but let's not pretend you're standing outside of them. The audience stirred. Trevor raised his eyebrows, his smile tightening, but he said nothing. Hemsworth continued, his voice gaining weight. Yet you've built an extraordinary career criticizing power structures, exposing hypocrisy, challenging privilege, and that's important. But here's the thing, you're not doing that from the street corner. You're doing it right here, in one of America's most watched shows, backed by $1 billion network. That's power, that's privilege. You've earned it, sure, but you're part of the same machine. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some clapped tentatively, others murmured. Trevor adjusted in his chair, the confident lean replaced by a defensive shift. Chris pressed forward. It's easy to point at actors and say we're the problem, that we're the faces of privilege, the distractions. But what about the media companies broadcasting these conversations? What about the governments shaping inequality? What about the platforms that profit off outrage? If you really want to talk about privilege, shouldn't we all look in the mirror, including you? The words cut deeper than a personal defense. They were a cross-examination, turning the courtroom spotlight away from Hemsworth and placing it firmly on Trevor Noah himself. Trevor tried to smile, but his voice wavered slightly. Are you saying I shouldn't call out the system just because I'm in it? Chris didn't flinch. No. I'm saying don't pretend you're above it. Don't act like your role in this industry is somehow cleaner than mine. We're both here. We both benefit. The difference is, I don't claim to be the outsider throwing stones. I admit I'm inside the system. Can you? The audience gasped again, louder this time. Some clapped, some shouted approval. The tide was shifting. Chris leaned back now, giving Trevor space, his voice calm but unrelenting. Critique matters, calling for change matters, but responsibility, that belongs to all of us. Not just actors, not just studios, not just politicians, you, me, everyone sitting here. We're all part of it. If we want change, we have to own the part we play. The crowd broke into applause, stronger this time, not just polite but resonant. The balance of energy in the room tilted. Trevor's smile faded to something thinner, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk, the instinct of a man who had been thrown off script. Chris finished with a quiet punch, his words hanging in the air like a verdict. So yes, let's talk about privilege. But let's talk about yours too. The studio exploded. Cheers, whistles, claps that rolled like waves. Trevor tried to interject, but the noise drowned him. For the first time, his control of the audience had slipped completely. The prosecutor had become the one under cross-examination. The humiliation was not delivered with mockery or insult. It was surgical, exposing contradiction with calm precision. Trevor's eyes flickered, the tight smile now a mask. He was no longer the one asking the questions. Chris Hemsworth had turned the mirror, and the crowd loved it. The studio no longer felt like a comedy set. It had transformed into something else, something rawer and heavier. The lights still burned, the cameras still rolled, but the laughter, the lifeblood of the Daily Show, had drained away. In its place was silence punctuated by bursts of applause, gasps, and the uneasy hum of shifting loyalties. The audience had become the jury. Every word, every gesture, every glance between Trevor Noah and Chris Hemsworth was weighed and measured in real time. It wasn't simple entertainment anymore, it was testimony. Trevor's arguments had struck chords of truth, and the applause showed it. But Chris's calm counterattack, his mirror turned back on Trevor, had drawn cheers that shook the walls. The crowd wasn't laughing now, they were judging. One woman in the front row leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly, nodding each time Chris spoke. A man further back shouted, "That's right," when Hemsworth accused Trevor of enjoying privilege himself. Others clapped for Trevor's statistics, but the clapping always died faster than before, as if the certainty of the case was eroding under Chris's quiet fire. The camera panned across faces, wide eyes, furrowed brows, smirks replaced by seriousness. This wasn't late-night fluff anymore. It was political theater, unfolding live. And beyond the studio, the world was already watching. Clips were being clipped, cut, and posted on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram before the segment was even over. Hashtags began to spark. Hashtag Hemsworth vs Noah, hashtag Thor on trial, hashtag privilege debate. The audience in the studio was the immediate jury, but the global audience outside was the appellate court, and its reach was infinite. Inside, Trevor felt the shift. His jokes, normally guaranteed to land, no longer sparked the same easy laughter. His smile stayed, but his eyes darted toward the crowd more often, searching for the approval that came so naturally in other interviews. Now he had to fight for it. Chris, by contrast, sat steady, shoulders relaxed, but his voice measured like a man who knew the weight of silence. He wasn't a comedian, he wasn't trained in this arena, but his sincerity struck chords deeper than any punchline could. The jury felt it. "Think about it," Chris said quietly, his voice resonating in the silence. "If we all keep pointing fingers at someone else, who's left to take responsibility? Change doesn't come from tearing each other down. It comes from owning our part." The audience erupted again, clapping, nodding, some even shouting approval. The roar wasn't unanimous, but it was undeniable. Trevor's eyes flickered. He knew that kind of applause. It wasn't for a clever joke, it was for conviction. In living rooms across the country, viewers leaned closer to their screens. Online, debates flared instantly. Some sided with Trevor. "He's right. Hollywood is writ. Gid." Others praised Chris. Finally, someone calls out the hypocrisy. Noah got checked. The audience wasn't just the 100 people in the studio. It was millions, watching, replaying, arguing, and